His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thomas Crawford stared at the letter for the third time that morning, trying to make sense of the knot in his chest. 3 words kept jumping out at him from the careful handwriting. I ain't pretty. The stagecoach would roll into town in less than an hour, bringing with it a woman he'd never laid eyes on. A woman who'd be his wife by week's end if he didn't turn her away. Thomas set the letter down on the kitchen table and walked to the window, looking out over the Wyoming ranch land that stretched toward the mountains. 8 years he'd live alone in this house. 8 years since Margaret died, bringing their stillborn son into the world. 8 years of silence, so thick it pressed against his ears like cotton. He was 42 years old and felt every day of it in his bones. The ranch was doing well. Cattle prices were up, the grass was good, and he had reliable hands working for him. But prosperity meant nothing when you ate every meal alone and went to bed in a house that echoed with emptiness. His sister Emily had been the one to finally break through his stubborn isolation. She'd practically forced him to place the advertisement in the Missouri newspaper. "You're dying by inches, Thomas," she'd said, "and I won't watch it anymore." The advertisement had been simple. Rancher, widower, seeking honest woman for marriage. Must be of good character and willing to work. Wyoming territory. He hadn't expected much response. Who wanted to come out to the middle of nowhere to marry a man they'd never met? But the letters had come. A dozen of them. Most he'd thrown away after reading the first few lines. Women wanting to know how much land he owned, how much money he had, whether he'd buy them dresses from San Francisco. Then came Sarah Mae Jenkins's letter. It was different from the start. No questions about money or land. Instead, she'd written about the garden she kept behind the boarding house where she worked. She'd told him about a bird that nested in the eaves every spring and how she left out seeds for it. She'd asked him if Wyoming had fireflies because she missed them from her childhood. Small things, real things, things that made him smile for the first time in longer than he could remember. They'd exchanged 6 letters over 3 months. With each one, Thomas found himself checking the mail more eagerly. Sarah wrote like she talked, he imagined, direct and honest, with a dry humor that caught him off guard. She'd asked him real questions. What did he regret most in his life? What made him laugh? If he could go back and change one thing, what would it be? And she'd answered the same questions about herself. She told him about losing her parents young, about working since she was 14, about the loneliness of watching other people's lives while feeling invisible in her own. Thomas had found himself being more honest in those letters than he'd been with anyone, even Margaret. He'd written about his failures as a husband, about how he'd been so focused on building the ranch that he'd forgotten to build a marriage, about how Margaret had been beautiful and kind, and how he'd somehow managed to make her lonely even when they were in the same room. He'd promised himself that if he ever got another chance, he'd do better. He'd be better. But now this letter, it had arrived yesterday, and it had kept him up all night. Sarah's handwriting had been shakier than usual, as if her hand had trembled while she wrote. Mr. Crawford, it began formal after months of using his first name. I need to tell you something before I arrive, and you have every right to send me back on the next stage if you choose. I ain't pretty, sir. I'm plain as a fence post, and that's being generous. I'm 34 years old with brown hair that won't hold a curl and a face that's easy to forget. I know you never asked what I looked like, and I appreciated that more than you know, but it wouldn't be right to let you think you're getting something you're not. Thomas had read those words over and over, feeling something twist in his gut. But it was what came next that had really struck him. I'm telling you this now, so I won't have to see disappointment in your eyes when I step off that coach. You seem like a good man, Mr. Crawford, and I'd rather remember you from your letters than see you try to hide what you're feeling. But I need you to know something else too. I can cook, sir. I can cook better than anyone you've ever met. And I know what it means to be invisible. I know what it means to be the person nobody notices. Maybe that's what you need. Someone who won't expect much. Someone who'll be grateful for whatever kindness you can spare. The letter had ended simply. I'll be on the Thursday stage. If you're not there to meet me, I'll understand. Sarah Mae Jenkins. Thomas picked up the letter again, running his thumb over her signature. His first reaction had surprised him. He felt disappointed, yes, but not because she wasn't pretty. He was disappointed because she thought it mattered, because someone had made her feel like her only value was being useful, being invisible, being grateful for scraps. And he was disappointed in himself for placing an advertisement that made her think he was looking for a transaction instead of a person. The truth that had kept him awake was simpler and more complicated than appearance. He'd been looking forward to meeting her. Not the idea of her, not just a wife, but Sarah. The woman who wrote about fireflies and asked him about regrets. The woman whose letters had made him feel less alone for the first time since Margaret died. And now she was coming here, believing she had to apologize for her face. Thomas. Emily's voice came from the doorway. His sister had arrived early, as she'd promised, to help him meet his bride. She was 50 years old, sturdy and practical, with gray streaking through her brown hair. She'd been widowed herself 10 years back and had no patience for foolishness. You ready? I don't know what I am, Thomas admitted. He handed her the letter. Emily read it quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Lord have mercy, she said quietly. Someone hurt this girl bad. I know. You thinking of turning her away? Thomas looked at his sister. Are you out of your mind? Why would I do that? Emily's expression softened. Good, because if you did, I'd have to knock sense into you. Come on, stage will be here in 30 minutes. She paused at the door. Thomas, just so you know, Margaret was beautiful, and you failed her anyway. So maybe try seeing if someone's heart is pretty instead of their face. The words stung because they were true. Thomas grabbed his hat and followed his sister out to the wagon. The ride into town took 20 minutes, and he spent every one of them trying to figure out what he'd say. How did you tell someone that you weren't disappointed when they'd spent a lifetime learning to expect nothing else? The town of Clearwater wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings. The stagecoach stop was in front of the hotel, and there was already a small crowd gathering. News traveled fast in a small town, and everyone knew Thomas Crawford was collecting his mail-order bride today. The stage rolled in right on time, dust billowing up from the wheels. Thomas's heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The driver climbed down and opened the door. A businessman stepped out first, then an older woman, then a young cowboy. Thomas was starting to think Sarah had changed her mind when one more passenger appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, and Thomas got his first look at Sarah Mae Jenkins. She was exactly as she described herself. Brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, average